Can we have a round of applause for the author as she walks in? We've thousands of authors, thousands of storytellers, and the journey that they have come this far, the inspiration that they gained, all of these things are going to inspire you, encourage you to write. And most importantly, what before write? Read. Absolutely. With a round of applause, can we please welcome the author of this morning, Anita Nair, to the stage.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and I'm delighted to see so many of you here. One of the things about becoming an author is that you travel around the world. Um, if you publish internationally, you travel around the world and you go to multiple book fairs and book events and so on. So I guess, like last evening, I was telling people here that this fair reminds me of the Gothenburg Book Fair because it's a fair for people. It's not a fair for the literary establishment. And as an author, I'm delighted to be with people who are my readers or who perhaps will one day be my reader rather than spending time with booksellers. So I think that's for me the biggest impression that I have of the Sharjah Book Fair, that it's amazing to see people come in and to see people going away with trolleys filled with books. It's like people picking up cereal and milk. That's how it should be. Books is a need of our lives. It should be part of every household. The way I evaluate, I mean, maybe it is very, very prejudicial, but the way I evaluate a person is when I go to their house, I'm looking to see if they have any books at all. And if there is a book in that house, I'm instantly comfortable.
All right, guys, let's get started, with kind of, what I've thought is this is going to be a workshop kind of a thing, interactive, so that children can know from you about the nuances of writing. 1 hour is not enough for that, but still, to get started, the inspiration, that's what they want.
Let me start off by telling you that I used to write even as a very young person, a very young person. Unfortunately, it's not like, now when you have a greater understanding of what books are and what books can be and what books are meant to do. So when I started writing, I didn't come from a family of writers. I actually came from a family of artists. And if I'd picked up a pen or a pencil and started sketching, everybody just accepted it as part of my genetic makeup. But yes, I do paint, I do sketch, but for me, my greatest source of creative sustenance are the words. And so for me, when I started writing, it kind of took my family a little by surprise. It took my teachers by surprise because at the time when I was growing up, there were not too many writers writing in English. There were very few of them. There were like a handful of them, truly. And so it was a point where I didn't know what I was doing and how I was going to shape myself as a writer. And then I discovered my school library. And at the school library, it was like, the school librarian would be like shaking his head because I would go borrow books before the school began. At the lunch break, I'd go and return it and take a fresh set of books. And he said, "Aren't you studying in class? What are you doing?" And I'd say, "No, but, I pretty much finish everything and then I start reading." And fortunately for me, I had wonderful teachers in school who understood that. It wasn't that I was reading without doing my schoolwork or whatever. I was doing it in addition to my schoolwork. But the thing was, very soon I'd pretty much finished reading everything that was there in the school library. And it shaped my mind in a way I think nothing else could have done. Hello? Yeah. So, anyway, so then, and also I grew up in a defense township. What happened is, again, because we have people from different parts of the country, from different parts of India, in a defense township. We also had a wonderful club library there. But these were books that were not just for children, it was also for adults, and it was, adult reading, etc., and so on. So once in a while, what I would do is I'd drag my mother to the library and make her borrow books that I wanted to read. And my older brother would borrow books, and I would read those as well. So even when I was like, say, 9 and 10 and 11, I was reading books that were meant for adult reading. But it wasn't that I understood everything, but what it did was that it, opened me up to the world of imagination. It opened me up to the language, because, you find that language changes. The way it's written for children is very different the way it's written for adults. And I found the beauty of language. I found the beauty of working either. So yeah, so I started reading so much that even to this day, I cannot step out without something to read. Oh, hello? Yeah, so what I'd tell all of you, any of you who are inclined towards writing, is the first place to begin is by reading. Reading is where it all begins. There cannot be a good writer who hasn't read enough.
Fortunately, I have a very loud voice, don't I? I might not need this. All right, now we know where did she, what age was this, Anita, if we may know? What age are you talking about here?
So I started reading from the time I was, let's say, 6, 5 and 6. Because I
Okay.
had an older brother, and he's older than me by 4 years. And everything he did, I had to do. So I was reading, books that were not meant for 5 and 6-year-olds. I was reading books that were meant for 10-year-olds, because that was what he was reading.
Yeah.
And I also read a lot of comics. I enjoyed reading comics. I still enjoy reading comics. And I have a confession to make. Every night before I go to sleep, I have to watch some Tom and Jerry.
Wow.
It, it So the other day, my son, I have a grown-up son, my son was asking me, why is it that I hear the Tom and Jerry music from your room in the night? And I said, that's because I need to watch it in the night before I go to sleep. It's because, I think what makes life really wonderful for me is that I still have a child's mind, the child's mind to know, to discover new things, to find things that are funny, and to be able to accept the world for what it is without speculating about what it could be. So I think that's one of those things that you need to kind of cling to no matter what, is that never ever lose the child in you.
That's a very big message to the children in this room. As you are in the adolescent / young adult age, this is a very important message. It is good to be a child yet. Now we've talked about where she started. Can you tell us a little bit about when you thought of transitioning from a reader to a writer?
So I'll tell you, this is a very interesting story. So every summer, my brother and I would go to my grandmother's house in Kerala, and we would travel with like a giant bag of books. And within the first 2 weeks, this is like a 5-week vacation that we were going on. Within the first 2 weeks, I would have finished reading everything that was there. And the option was to either reread everything, and all the old copies of Reader's Digest and everything that I would have read the previous summer, I would pull out again from the attic and read again. And then at some point, I remember I was in class 4. I was about 9 years old, and I decided that I was going to write, and I was madly in love with Enid Blyton at that point. I still am. So I decided that perhaps I would try and write a book, just so that it kept me going, kept me occupied. And so when I was in class 4, I started writing this book. I had no plot. All the children in the book seemed to do were have large, elaborate meals. So it was constantly about them eating bread, and I like pineapple jam. So they were always eating bread and pineapple jam, or they were, doing some mad things with their pets. So everything that I liked started appearing in the books that I wrote at that point when I was 8.
So she got started at 8. That brings me to the plot. As you grew up as a writer, I can see that more of your plots are rural India, particularly Kerala. Of course, you have touched other areas as well. What was the reason behind keeping your native, keeping your rural town as the plot for most of your depictions?
So I come from a very small village in Kerala. It's a really tiny village. And if you can get your name around it, I'll be really surprised. It's called Mundakotapurushi. Okay.
Tongue twister,
It's a
guys.
tongue twister. So my family goes back there several generations. I mean, we can trace our family back to this 17th century there. And I have very strong roots in that place. Now, my parents, they didn't live there actually. My father was born in Burma and so on. And finally, after retirement, my dad and mom moved to my village. And it's my ancestral village from both my father's side and my mother's side. So they moved there back, and they were not very comfortable about living there because they've lived in big cities and it's really tiny rural place. But for me it was like I got there and I felt like this, I belong here, I know exactly what this is about. So at some point my parents wanted to sell up and move from there, and I started writing a story which I thought was going to be like a chronicle of this village that I came from, just describing the village, the landscape, the people, the customs, and so on. More like a memory book that I would give to my son and my nephews. But like when I was done with the first chapter, I was like, hey, I'm not going to be writing a chronicle. This is going to be my first novel. And so that was how my first novel was born. And I discovered that this little village continues to be a perennial source of inspiration for me, that each time I go there, and I go there every month, each time I go there, there's something there that kind of gets my attention. It could be something as, silly as getting up one morning and hearing a peacock screaming. It could be something as magnificent as standing in my veranda and watching the rain fall first on the mountain and then it coming down towards the house that I'm staying in. So it's just wonderful things like that. It started making me very aware of the landscape around me, the world around me, the sights, the sounds, the scents, all of it. It was like all my senses came alive there. And I discovered that when that happens, it percolates down into my writing as well. And so, which is why I use a lot of that village in my writing.
And it's so beautifully depicted, my dear friends, that you would decide not to go to Switzerland, but to Mundagotugurushi to see the plot yourself. I've never been to Shornur, but I'm planning to go after I've read you. Now, this is a question for the young adults in this room and who are aspiring writers. The other day, Gulzar Sab was here in this chair, and he said the biggest challenge he faced as a youngster was people asked him, what do you do as a job? Then he would say, yes, I'm a poet, I write. No, but that's fine. What do you do for earning? Many children have this apprehension because of the pressure in the family to become an engineer or a doctor or a professional or something else that either their parents or somebody in the family would want them to, because I work very closely with them. I know that for a fact. How is it to become a writer as a professional writer?
I have the same problem too. I won't say the same problem, but the same question, which is when people ask me, so what do you do? And I'd say, so here's what I finally decided. If someone didn't know I was a writer, then there was no point in telling them I was a writer. So I'd say, oh, I do nothing. I just sit at home and I play with the dogs and I bake and that kind of thing. I mean, I wish I had the guts to tell people each time, reinvent a personality for myself and say I'm an astronaut, or whatever, and let's see what comes out of it. But when there are people I meet and they say, they ask me, are you still writing? It's like as if it was something that I just took up, like kickboxing for a while, and then I was going to give it up. But as a writer, what happens is that you're going to have to face two kinds of pressures. One is this pressure from the world, which doesn't understand, because you see, unlike music or dance or painting, where you have a physical activity to depict, or sculpture, any of the other artistic pursuits that you can do, where there is something to show for as you're working. What does a writer have? A writer either is sitting with a book and a pen or sitting in front of a computer. So to most people, that just seems like a very mundane thing to do. And so they don't see it as real work. They don't see it as something that can drain you out so that you feel like a hollowed out mango, for instance, just the skin and the seed. So there is that pressure of people not understanding. And secondly, there is this question of like, what will you do? You've written a book, but you can't live off writing. What are you going to do?
Very true.
Yes, I advocate people from giving up their full-time jobs or their part-time jobs, because the pressure becomes so much that it can cripple your writing. So I would recommend that if you have you want to take up writing, I'd suggest that you plan your careers in such a way that you pursue an interest or your academic line of work which has something to do with the world of writing, which could be journalism, which could be advertising, which could be publishing, which could be teaching, you know, anything. I mean, there are writers who emerged from the world of
Engineering,
corporate,
business,
business, doctors,
doctors.
so many of them. But it's not easy, because if you have constantly you're in touch with the world that you want to inhabit, then it makes it easier for you to get in there. But that is the external pressure. The greater pressure that you're going to have to surmount is the pressure that comes from within you, because ask any creative person, ask any artist, and they will tell you that we live with this constant need of not knowing, constant need for validation, and constant fear of not knowing where we are going with our own work. So if you are anchored and you're rooted in what you want to do and how you're going to do it, that makes that journey that much more easier. I'm not going to say it's easy, it's going to just make it easier.
Wonderful. That comes from immense experience, boys and girls, because she was earlier working in the advertising industry, and she has already plotted the plan for herself. That's why she moved into that. That's a great piece of advice. A round of applause for that. Now we have seen how you've taught yourself as a progressed from a reader to a writer. It's very difficult to catch the attention of a publisher. Satire of the Subway, which is your first creation, was honored by Virginia. You got an admission to Virginia Center of Creative Arts through that writing. So that was a very good initiative to start with, wasn't it? So how do a young writer, an aspiring writer, catch the attention of a publisher?
Okay, let me tell you this. Before you catch the eye of a publisher, or the attention of a publisher, the first thing that you need to do is to write your book. I'm constantly running into people who tell me that, oh, I want to write a book. I have this great book idea in my head. Now, the thing is, book ideas don't become books unless you sit down and write. So here is a piece of advice that I give to all aspiring writers. I run a creative mentorship program, a writing mentorship program. And I tell each one of my writers that don't get too ambitious. Don't try and think that you can write, 2,000 words every day when you begin. What you do is every day you just give yourself the time and the bandwidth to write 400 words. 400 words is one page, or if it's your Word document, it's 1 page and 4 lines. Okay, so 400 words is all you need. Every day, if you write 400 words, in a week, you have 6 into 4. Give yourself a day off. 6 into 4, you have 2,400 words. Look at that into, let's say, 52 weeks, and you'll have a full-length book in your hand. So that's all you need to do. Start off by writing 400 words every day. Before you write, be very clear about what you're going to be writing that day. There's no point in writing and then going back and the other more important thing, well, all of this is important, but one of the things that new writers tend to do is that you constantly look at what you've written the day before and you start editing and you don't progress. So the thing is to get your first draft down, write it from beginning to end, and then you can go back to it and do the second draft and third draft and whatever. So whether you're writing a poem, whether you're writing a short story, whether you're writing an essay, and since you're young children, I would say, young adults, I would say stay away from the novel a bit. How many of you swim here? Yeah, okay. So you understand that when you learn to swim, the first thing you need to do is to learn to hold your breath. And you start at the shallow end while they advocate jumping off at the deep end and all those things. If you want to be a confident swimmer and a stylish, graceful swimmer, you need to get your your maneuvers in place. And so that is important. So you need to be able to write on a sustained basis. Think it through and then start writing. So in a year's time, you would probably have a book ready and then go back, edit it, do whatever you want with it, and then approach a publisher, because publishers are not running a charity. It is a commercial establishment. It is a business. They are looking to make money on your backs, and they do not want to make an investment that's not going to give them returns.
Absolutely.
So they are looking for work that is almost at its final stages. You don't want to send, once upon a time, many, many years ago, there would be a publisher who would take a young writer, groom them, and turn them into a fine writer. We don't live in that world anymore. So the onus is entirely on you to build your, book in such a way that it's almost at its finished stage.
My dear friends, you're getting all of these exemplary tips for free because you're with Anita Nair at the Sharjah International Book Fair. Round of applause. After your course in creative writing, your next book was adopted or taken up by Penguin. So that's like a big boom, isn't it? So how much do you advocate taking training or getting trained in creative writing for the children in this
So
room?
when I went to the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, it wasn't a training program. It was basically an artist residency, which to a lot of people, we don't have, in India, we don't have very many artist residencies. The Western world is filled with a lot of artist residencies where they provide an atmosphere and the amenities for you to be able to focus on your creative pursuit entirely. So basically, they are taking care of your board and your hospitality and they give you a lovely studio to work in and those kind of things. So basically, for me, what it did was it gave me the headspace to sit down and to be able to finish the first novel that I was working on at that point. So now I run, for the last 5 years, I've been running a creative writing mentorship program for adults. And one of the things that I do is I work with my writers very intimately and I teach them the tricks of writing better. See, the thing is, you have to be able to write. It starts with that. You can't teach somebody how to write like you can't teach somebody who doesn't have a musical bone in them to sing. What they would be doing is very mechanical. It won't be really inspired. So it's not that every one of us have to be writers. Every one of us can be readers. Some of us become writers. So for the writers, I train them to, train their minds more than anything else, because the mind is like a horse, and the horse can sometimes go, if it's not trained, it can just go all over the place, and it's not going to get to the destination that it's meant to. And even if it's running free, it's just going to be running free without any purpose. So what I do is, with my writers, I show them how to be able to train their minds and what they can do to enhance their writing skills. So I would suggest that as young adults, for you, the best training ground is to be able to read as vastly and as widely as you can.
Thank you very much for that tip. Now, this question is derived from your statement about, the getting started and writing. And the other day, I was asking a child who's very good at writing as to why do you want to write. He said, "I want to become as famous as Paulo Coelho." I was like, that's a long way ahead. So I'm trying to break the notion that the author's life is not about the fame and the media attention and the flair and the fancy, but it's about a lot of reading and hard work. How do you compare the gratification that you get when you finish a book versus the fame that you get?
So once upon a time, you just wrote a book. You didn't have to promote it. You didn't have to talk about it. The media didn't pay much attention to it, etc., and so on. But in the last, let's say, 20, 30 years, writers have also acquired a sort of, star status. And there's a lot of, and the reason is many of these books also go on to become films. So obviously the viewership is much vaster than the readership is, and the writer acquires a kind of legendary status. Now, as a writer, now this is very, very individual, very, very subjective, and very personal. As a writer, the joy, the gratification, and the sense of fruition that I derive when I write, the process of writing, is something that nothing else can compare, but the rest of it, having to, I mean, I was just telling Savita earlier that I enjoy being with young adults. I enjoy being with, students like you and talking to you. But it's not always so. Sometimes you're in a room filled with people who are there for all the wrong reasons. And you still have to talk to them about your writing like it means anything to them at all. It means nothing to them. They're just kind of ticking a box. Okay, meet author X. Yes, get a book signed by author Y, that kind of thing. So I am very, I mean, I have absolutely no sense of, false sense of what it means to be a writer. As far as media attention is today, the media could be talking about me. Tomorrow it could be talking about an elephant that's trapped somewhere. So that is how, like they say, every news has only 24-hour validity. After that, it becomes irrelevant. So fame is a fickle friend. Fame is is definitely a fickle friend, and riches is an even greater fickler friend, because what your writing or your creative pursuit should mean to you is that it should define who you are as a person. It shouldn't be that, when you do something, it shouldn't be about where it leads to. It should be about how you're doing it. And let's not think about, all of you know that story about that woman who has 6 eggs and she thinks, if these hatch, I'll have 6 chickens, I will sell them, buy a goat, blah, 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 and finally the eggs break. And she's left with nothing. So in very much the same way, I would think that writing for me, and should ideally be for a lot of people, writing should be about what it feels like when you are creating something. What is that sense of urgency? What is that sense of agency? What is that sense of dynamic energy that fills you? The sense that you're one with the universe, because that is how complete a creative process can be. And it shouldn't be about, oh, I want to be famous as this person, I want to make as much money as that person, I want to be invited to all these fancy do's and, be part of the glamour circuit, etc. It's not about that. It's about what it does for you as a person. So if there are writers in this room, or or young people who want to be writers, I'd tell you, examine your motives for why you want to write. Do you have something to say? Do you have a story to tell? Do you have a poem to write? start writing from there. Start writing because there is something that means a great deal to you, and it is so important that you can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't do anything because it completely takes over your life. And then you know that you are on the verge of writing something that is important.
Clarity of a crystal. That's very, very clear to you. Why should somebody write? We have a lot of things to discuss here, and we can go on and on, but we have not touched upon the works of Anita Nair. I'm sure you've seen the books out here. This being the latest book, and the cover itself ticks a bell, right? You want to ask a question from this cover. Can you just tell us briefly about this? Has anyone read this book in the room? Less possible, but the books are here, suggestively for adolescents, right? Beyond that.
No. This is for older people.
Older people.
But if there are like
Young
15
adults?
and upwards, 14 and upwards, I think you could read
Yeah,
this.
yeah, young adults, yeah. All right, so would you please tell us something about the latest book?
So, Eating Wasps is about a writer who, dies about 51 years ago. And then she comes back to life. She doesn't come back to life, but a bone from her body is discovered. And it kind of triggers up a whole set of events where basically her spirit comes back, and she becomes a listener, and she meets multiple people, and with everybody she gets to understand the story of their life to some extent, and why they're doing what they're doing at that point. So it's a journey of what is of various women and men, each one trying to define who they are, and once they have defined who they are, they learn to become comfortable with that thought. Because you see, one of the things that is happening in the world that we live in is, unlike say about 25 years ago, where people were grappling to understand their identity, today we live in a world where to a large extent we know what our identity is, but we don't know how to preserve it. We don't know how to keep it going, and we allow extraneous influences to change our identity or make a difference to the kind of person we are. And so this book is an exploration about that, about various characters who have multiple things happening. There is a girl who's a badminton champion. There is another woman who has a child with autism. There is another person who makes friends with a young man who turns out to be a terrorist. There is, so there are different kinds of people, encounters with different kinds of people. There are two sisters, and you don't know who's lying. Both of them, their stories seem very, very plausible, but you don't know who's lying. So there are different stories that emerge from different characters, and each one is an indication of the kind of people all of us could be, and how do we deal with the circumstances that surround our existence.
But why wasps?
So, wasps, as all of you know, are not very nice creatures. They can sting you quite badly, and it can be very, very, very painful. But the main protagonist of this novel, when she's a young girl, really young girl, she, yearns to eat honey. And in her grandmother's house, she's not even given a spoon of honey. She's just given a spoon to lick after that. So she thinks that one day she really must eat like a big mouthful of honey. And she's young. She's only 4 years old. And she thinks that wasps are just giant honeybees, So she thinks that if she could, chew down on a wasp, she would get like a mouthful of honey. And so she actually does it, she just goes ahead and tries to eat a wasp. And that is something that I've used as a metaphor of facing challenges. How do you face a challenge? So how do you deal with a wasp? Do you run away? Do you stand still and pretend it's not around? Or do you go into the attack mode and try and kill it? Or like Sri Lakshmi does in this try and eat it. So wasps here are representative of challenges, and this is about a young girl and how she confronts life's challenges.
What a well thought after, huge metaphor is that. It has a story by itself. I guess you can write a story about the title Eating Was by itself. Now, before we go on to the young girls and boys in this room, how much do you weigh the social responsibility of a writer? From times immemorial, writers have influenced societies, have influenced political positions, have influenced diplomats. What is the position of a writer today, especially in this boom of social media and public demonstrations?
So, when I began writing, I really didn't understand the responsibility that resides in a social responsibility that resides in a writer. Because it was all about, it was a very, very, almost a very self-centric decision, what I'm going to write, how I'm going to write it, and so on. But over the years, I've realized that as a writer, I mean, it's foolish of me to imagine that I can just completely change all your minds, through one book or two books or three books. But I do realize that I can impact your minds. I can impact the way you think. I can make you re-look at things that you take for granted, make you re-look at things that you take as the gospel truth, make you re-look at things that could change the society we are part of. So as a writer, now I've started bringing in social commentary into my writing, because I don't want to be writing a polemic. I don't want to be writing books that tell you how to live your lives. I want you to read a book and think about it and ask yourself, hey, am I doing this? Am I guilty of this? Can I do this better? So in many ways, as a writer, I think my responsibility is to hold up a mirror to the society and allow you to see yourself for who you are. And you have to make the decision whether you want to change or whether you just want to continue the way you are. So that is the responsibility of a writer. Secondly, I think, and very importantly, in the times that we live in, where social media has such a huge impact on our lives, and there's so much turbulence world over, it's the responsibility of a writer to not instigate violence or any sort of negativity in people.
That's a brilliant message. Just to button in, Anita, I know that you do a little bit of work with activism against child trafficking and abuse. Can you throw some light on that?
I really wouldn't be honest if I were to say I'm doing some work with them, but what I do is I write about it, I talk about it at public forums so that people understand it better. So one of the biggest problems that the world has, and strangely enough, we don't talk about it enough because it's a sordid matter, is trafficking of children. Trafficking of children to work in factories as bonded labor, and trafficking of children for sex. And basically what happens is that children are taken away from their homes, sometimes because of poverty. Children are sold into the trade that they are forced into going, and it destroys a child's life, it destroys the child's mind, and it destroys the social fabric of the society we are part of. And children become commodities more than children. And it breaks my heart because I have seen young children who are like all of you here, who have dreams and aspirations, who want to do wonderful things in their lives as well, but poverty and family poverty drives them, or sometimes children are taken away from their homes and kidnapped, etc., and so on. So all of this makes me want to tell children, be careful, be vigilant. I mean, I'm not saying that you should distrust the world. You shouldn't distrust the world. That's the worst thing anybody can do, that you start looking at the world with a very jaundiced eye. No, it's not that. It's basically that look after yourself. Trust the world, but look after yourself.
Very important message. The last question would be of interest to everyone here. This generation children are often verbally slandered, saying, oh, you're always in your social media and your gadgets and devices. You don't do enough. You don't read. Is reading dying?
I don't think so. Look at this. We are sitting in a book fair. So I think reading formats may have changed. We might be reading on Kindle, we might be reading on an app, but reading exists, and it's not just pages of a book that make it a book. It's not physical books alone. There are e-books, there are audio books, all of that. So get your writing fix one. I mean, reading fix one way or the other. As long as you get it, it's wonderful. But I personally, I enjoy reading a physical book because I like the tactile feeling of holding a book, sniffing at the pages, etc., and all those things. Give yourself a shot and see. It's like it's like a lovely coffee that you drink. You smell it and then you drink it. So with your books too, when you start reading it, sniff the book first before you read it.
Thank you for that. And this generation is a very fast generation. So I have a rapid fire question round for you from the questions that I derived from the audience. If not a writer, what?
A goat farmer.
Ooh! Did you dream to be a writer at some point of time?
No.
Wow. You seem to be a person of colors and openness. Did that demonstrate your character as well?
Yes, I love colors.
You have a beautiful house with colored walls and an open house. Amazing. You should go to the net and see that. So that's pretty much your character. Which is the favorite character of all those you have created? Difficult question.
Idris.
Idris. Don't forget to read Idris, guys. How was family's influence in writing, your husband and your son? Do they support?
The best thing is they don't interfere.
Good philosophy, isn't it? You seem to be a person of pets. What's your pet's name?
I have 13 cats in my garden. And so they have different names. Ivan, Ginger, Cooney, Mummy, Kitty.
Cat lovers
Snowy.
in this room? Any? Myself too.
And I have 2 dogs.
So that's proportionate. You love solitude or center stage?
Solitude, absolutely.
Solitude. What is your method to unwind other than writing?
Swimming and singing.
Singing. Does that ask for something, guys, here? After the rapid round, that is. If you are in your next life, you want to be a man or a woman?
I'd still want to be a woman.
Yeah. Superb. Superb. I always wish that I could speak like Shashi Tharoor. Is there anyone you thought you should write like?
No.
Write like Anita Nair, ladies and gentlemen. So with that, we come to the end of the rapid fire. And then it's now open to you all for questions. I know several questions are burgeoning in your mind. Can you come forward with those?
Ma'am, you're a successful author and an experienced one. You're used to writing books, taking comments and compliments related to the books you publish. There's always a 50-50 chance for the books to be successful and be read by all. But what most people fear about is that taking a chance. Firstly, my question to you is that, did you have the fear of taking that chance at the start of your career as an author? And secondly, what would you advise to those who fear taking this chance, who are adolescents?
Yes, like everybody else, like most people. And the thing is, writers and all creative artists tend to be very insecure people. You never know what you put your heart and soul into is going to matter to anybody else. But at some point, you need to have the courage of conviction. You need to be able to believe in yourself, because if you don't believe in yourself, how is anybody else going to believe in you? So that is a thing that I've always, stood by. I said, it doesn't matter to me if nobody reads me. When I started writing, it doesn't matter to me if nobody reads me. What matters to me is that I write to the best of my ability. So that is what I would tell.
Oh, we have a young girl with a question here.
When did you realize you wanted to be a writer?
Um, it was like about the only thing I was certain of right from the beginning. Even when I was like, when I started reading initially, when I said about 7 years old, I wrote my first poem. And when I wrote my first poem, the sense of fulfillment it gave me was so immense that back of my mind, I said, oh, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Um, we are very glad that you are here, and we've got to know a lot about you. But since a writer has to be very creative at his or her job, sometimes they can face a creative block. So, like, do you face a creative block, and how do you overcome that?
Do you have a writing block? No, I don't. I never have a writing block. But there are days when I have a bad day. It's like where, I know the words don't have the resonance that I want them to have. The words don't breathe. They're not alive. They're almost like dead words. So then one of the things that I do is that I go for a very long swim. I swim continuously for quite, like maybe I do about 15 laps or something like that. And at the end of it, the thing to do is to basically put your mind to rest. And so I just rest my mind, and when I finish my swim or whatever, there's clarity, and I'm back to doing what I have to do.
As you grow older, how does that affect your writing?
So which is what I said earlier, that never ever lose the child in you, because as you get older, everything can seem jaded, everything can seem, I've seen there, done this, been there, done that kind of thing. So one of the things is to always have this great, I find that I need to be able to look at the world with the eyes that I once looked at it when I was in my 20s or in my 30s or in my 40s. So as long as I don't allow my years to sit heavily on me, my writing is not going to get affected. Yes, when you have written enough, your writing becomes that much more assured, it becomes that much more strong, but it shouldn't be strong where it has lost the agility of youth in it.
From that question, if I can add on, as you mature, do you have hindsight? Oh, I should have written this a little better, or I should have molded this character a little better?
No, because before I finish a book, I have thought about it at such extensive detail that there's nothing that, in fact, when I go back to my writing and look at it now, I don't think I would change anything really. I mean, not
Brilliant.
broadly, I wouldn't change anything.
Absolutely. Good.
My question is to you that when you wrote your first book, is there any book that you read that inspired you to write your first book?
Inspiring book.
Not really. So my first book was a collection of short stories, which was set mostly in New York. It's called Satire of the Subway. So for me, that book was a way of discovering my own style and discovering how courageous I could be as a writer. Because, writers, when you write, the world is going to evaluate you based on what you're writing. So people probably, read what I write and think I'm this sort of a person. It could be completely diametrically opposite. But that's how the average person evaluates a writer, based on what they write. And you're laying yourselves open out there, and for the entire world to decipher what they think they are deciphering. So what I had to do was I had to ask myself, am I prepared to do this? And there was no book really for me to say that this is the kind of book that inspires me to write. But what I did at that point was I used to read a lot of biographies of creative people. And that kind of readied me for what lay ahead.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Yes.
Good morning, ma'am. As you have said, you have read many books. So how do the books you read influence your style of writing, like the language you use and all?
So I think it's about learning. One of the most important things that a writer has to have. There are certain tools. While you have creativity, you have imagination, etc. But there's also something called the tangible aspects of writing, which is the tools of the trade, which is basically language. How do you use language? So language has to be appropriate to uh, the kind of character I'm creating, the kind of landscape I'm creating, etc. So I would think while what it did for me is the different kinds of books I was reading. So one day I could be reading a translation set from Brazilian Portuguese. Another day I could be reading a translation from Japan. Another day I could be reading a novel written in English by, say, a certain writer from Scotland. So, you see how language is used, and that was what I think had the biggest impact on me, in the sense that I learned how to wield the pen to be able to find words that match exactly what I want to say.
Thank you. We have time for one last question.
Good morning, ma'am. My question to you is, have you ever tried reading your own books before?
One of the things that happens is that as a writer now, and that I go for various events and stuff like that, I do need to read from my work. So I look at parts of it to read, but once I've finished that book, I don't go back and read it.
I think it's more comfortable not to do that, right? Isn't it? With that, I think we have got time constraints, so we'll have to finish now. We've got the book signing session, but before that, there's a question from one of the young readers who have read you, asking this question: why are most of your protagonists women, and your themes are mostly women-centric? Do you mean to say, this is a boy who's writing this, do you mean to say that men do not have problems?
Ah, right. This is not technically correct. So of the novels that I've written, you would find the first novel I wrote was about a man. The second novel I wrote was about women. The third novel I wrote was about a man. The fourth novel I wrote was about a woman.
So you kept balance all
yeah,
through.
absolutely. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, fortunately probably, there are more women readers than men readers.
Yeah, and I think this is the most widely read. I think it's...
So the books with, women characters tend to get more attention than the ones with the men characters, because also, I hate to say this, but most male readers don't think enough of female writers, so they don't read them enough. And so there's a kind of perspective that is skewed here completely. So I think that is what needs to be addressed, more than me, thinking that women are the only ones with problems.
All right, boys, when are you getting started with reading women authors? Today, now. If you are still reading, it's fine. Please go ahead. Otherwise, now, right now. Thank you very much for being a wonderful and interactive crowd. We can't ask for a better crowd than you guys. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. And don't you think it was a workshop on the tools and the tales behind reading and writing? Wasn't it? If you think so, a round of applause once again for Anita Nair.